All right, hello and welcome to this episode where we're going to talk about recovery. And I want to talk about what I believe recovery from quote unquote OCD and anxiety is, and why, by holding certain definitions in your mind, you paradoxically will prevent yourself from ever reaching it. So let's go ahead and start with the idea of what's recovery. Well, recovery is breaking out of the loop, right? To put very simply, what breaking out of the loop does is that it allows you to lift into higher states of energy, which allows you to perceive things in a completely new way. So when you look at, if you haven't ever looked at Dr. David Hawkins' work of the maps of consciousness, I think he does a really good job of just laying that map out. It's something where our minds can conceptualize it. And even then, the mind conceptualizing something is still limited. But the maps of consciousness really is about, at every energy state or emotional state that we can experience as humans, it is like almost that we have a certain lens or goggle in which we see the world through. How we see the world, how we see God, how we see life, all of it. And when we're in a very low state like fear, and you're going to see it, the fear's well to the bottom of the list, right? The bottom of the scale. Fear is a very low emotion, and that low energy state, when we're in that state, it causes more fear thoughts, more fear emotion, and then when we do safety behaviors or compulsions, we form that loop, and then when we get stuck in that loop, we get stuck in that state, and therefore we see the world through that state. So, and anyone knows this that really has paid attention to their experience with OCD and anxiety, is at one point you're seeing the world a certain way, and then all of a sudden you see the world in a way where something you used to see that didn't bother you is now bothering you, or quote unquote triggering you, but it didn't used to trigger you before. Or a certain time you had this trigger and now you have this trigger, and you're starting to see the world in a very scary or dark kind of lens. And then if you stay in fear long enough, you tend to move into depression in a secondary lens, and then you see the world through even a darker lens. Very apathetic or depression, hopelessness, all that stuff. And so you can literally walk in the same park, and if you're in a anxious, fearful state, you may not even notice that you're in a park because you're just so in your mind. But if you're very depressed, nothing looks good to you, food doesn't taste good, all of that stuff, the park just doesn't look fun to you. But if you're in a real high energetic state, the park, you really can even, not to sound weird, but you can feel the energy of all the life around you, the trees, nature, right? You can step on fresh grass and really connect to that. And it can be a very amazing experience just walking in a simple park. So what's different? It's not the park that's changed. It's your own energetic state, your own consciousness, and the level of consciousness in which you're bringing into that environment. So what is recovery? Recovery is when we break out of the loop and we get into an entirely different energy state that then allows us to perceive something in a totally different light. And so we have paradigm shifts, belief changes, and our entire world changes. Not because the world outside actually changes, because the way that we see the world changes through our level of consciousness. And the way to do that is by breaking the loop and releasing and letting go of a lot of the fear that we're holding on to. See, so what happens in something like OCD and anxiety, why I don't actually believe they're quote unquote a disease, because I believe everyone has the ability to experience any level of emotion on that spectrum of emotions. I don't think the emotion itself is a disorder. What happens is when we get stuck in the loop because we're resisting the thoughts and feelings and we engage in behaviors, it creates a loop which creates disorder in our life. When we break the loop, we eliminate the disorder in our life because we're no longer feeding the loop, and then we are able to do the work of releasing a lot of the emotion from our system that allows us to shift consciousness. That's what recovery really is. And it's not doing ERP to get a certain outcome that you think you need to feel better, right? It's not, I'm going to do ERP so I get rid of these thoughts that I don't like. I'm going to do ERP so I get rid of these feelings I don't like. I'm going to try ACT. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this. The reason most people, don't reach recovery or really struggle on this journey is oftentimes because they're trying to insert a tool or a framework or skill set to help them achieve what they think they're supposed to achieve, not what the tool is designed to help you to achieve. Okay? And when it comes to OCD and anxiety, what is recovery and how do you reach it? It really is about this idea of recovery doesn't exist in the future. Our mind conceptualizes the world in this idea of past and future. The reality is that the only thing that ever exists is right now, and then there's what our mind says about the past and the future. But the past doesn't exist anymore right now, and neither does the future. So if you think that recovery is a futuristic destination, you're seeing the world in the linear. And the problem is you're waiting for the future, and the future never comes because the future is always the present. So the way to actually achieve recovery is to understand that recovery is something that unfolds in the now based on your practices and your level of consciousness. Now, if you're practicing not engaging in the loop by not engaging the behaviors, let's say you're using the AAA response like I teach, and so you're actually putting in the solution to make sure that loop can't form. And if you want more information about that, I have some links down in the notes. You can head over to restoredminds.com. You can check out my book, all of that, right? But you're putting the solution in place so that loop can't spin. Now, as that loop doesn't spin, what happens is all the emotion's going to come up to the surface in the system. And as you work with the emotion, and even you become non-resistant, you become conscious of the emotion, and you start to let go of the emotion, what happens is as you start to let go of it, the energy runs its course. As that happens, you naturally just shift into a higher state. And there might be layers of fear that need to be released, and even guilt underneath it, maybe shame, anger, right? A lot of our lower emotions that kind of dominate our state. And so to think that we're trying to get to somewhere in the future, the problem is we're always working towards the future. But if you understand that it's actually a present moment experience, that as we put the work in and we're practicing what we're supposed to practice, there's an unfoldment that just naturally happens in the present moment. You shift consciousness. And therefore you shift the lens in which you see something. So what used to be really scary because you were seeing it through the lens of fear, and let's say you shift into a higher energy of like neutrality or acceptance, in that state you see the thing totally different. And this, and you know this to be true. Okay, you know this to be true, and let me kind of explain. Think of something that you used to be afraid of in the past. Think of something that used to trigger you in the past that no longer does, and then explain how that's possible. Let's say that you used to have contamination fears and you no longer do, and that doorknobs used to trigger you and they no longer don't. How is that possible? Because if doorknobs really were the triggering cause of your fear, they would always cause that, right? It would be a cause and effect relationship, especially if you have two totally different themes now. Right? And doorknobs would also cause fear for other people because they would be the source. They would be the cause. However, what's really happening is we're projecting our own fear onto the item, onto the thing in our environment. And we're falling into the mirage or the illusion that is the cause of my fear, instead of realizing we are projecting the fear onto it. Now, if you're able to break out of that loop because one day you stop doing compulsions, even if you do this all unconsciously and you don't really know how you did what you did, eventually you broke the loop on this particular item and your fear shifted to something else. This is why if you never address fear as the actual source by releasing the actual emotion and energy of fear, it's just going to move from theme to theme to theme to theme to theme. And instead, what you realize is that what recovery is releasing and confronting the very fear, the emotion of fear itself in the body. And by becoming non-resistant to it, by learning how to actually let go of it, you stop projecting it onto your environment. Therefore, you stop engaging in compulsions and loops. Once you move through that energy, you move into a higher field of energy. And as you move higher and higher and higher, you take the very same thing. And when you're in a state of neutral, or you're in a state of acceptance or peace or love or joy, and you look at the same item that used to trigger you, it literally looks totally different. It's the same exact item. It's just you see it through a completely new level of consciousness, a lens of perception. You see a whole different world when you get into higher energy states. You live in a whole different world in higher energy states than people that live in the below 200 range, like Hawkins talks about in his scale. Like it really is a completely different life experience. And so how I define recovery, why I encourage you not to see it as a futuristic destination, is because you're always going to be looking as recovery as something in the future versus something that you can practice right now in the present. When you understand that recovery unfolds in the present based off your behaviors, based off the practices that you're engaging in, when you understand that by practicing the right stuff now, by practicing recovery, eventually that will become my reality. Because your consciousness level, your perception will just change. And trying to see it as I'm going to use these tools to get rid of the thing that I think is causing this, the thoughts or the feelings or my environment or my triggers or whatever, what's going to happen is you're always just going to keep projecting, and you're going to keep chasing the image that you're projecting. And paradoxically keep yourself stuck. So I wanted to make this episode because there was a comment on one of the episodes about defining what recovery is, and someone also had disagreed with my perception of recovery not seeing as recovery as something in the future because it takes away hope. Well, again, in my opinion, you thinking recovery is in the future is the thing that eliminates your hope, because you never reach the future. You're always here right now. By understanding it's something that unfolds now should be the most hopeful news that you could grasp, because then you begin to work at the right place, the right time, and the right tools, and it will cause an unfoldment to happen, a shift in consciousness. And that's really what recovery is. So hope this was helpful. Hope you benefited from this. And if so, you're welcome to check out more material or more resources over at restoredminds.com. We have some links down in the notes. And please help us out by liking and subscribing if you benefited from this as well. So thank you so much. Wish you a great day and a great week. And I'll see you on the next episode. Hey there. So if you enjoyed that video, we've linked up a few more videos that we think you'd find helpful as well. And if you have found this helpful, we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing. And if you're looking for help and guidance, please check out restoredminds.com, as we have several options for you to get started. See you guys soon.